Good morning. I'm Kirk Miller, the Executive Director of School Administrators of Montana, inviting you to and thanking you for joining session number 2, clinic session number 2 for the SAM Administrators Institute virtually delivered 2020. This is in the focus zone, physical and structural safety, and we're going to talk about school reopening strategies. And I'm happy to have with me today on this session 2 executive directors that we work very closely with at SAM for the Montana Public Education Center, both Dennis Parman and Lance Melton. And I'm going to ask them just to go ahead and introduce themselves and thank them for joining this team to deliver this session. So Dennis.
Thanks, Kirk. Good morning, everyone. Dennis Parman, I'm Executive Director of the Montana Rural Education Association, and real pleasure to be with all of you this morning.
Thanks, Dennis.
And thanks, everyone. I'm Lance Melton with the Montana School Boards Association. Glad to see everybody on here.
Okay, just by way of protocol here, if you would use the participant function and raise your hand if you are new to this session. You didn't come to session number 1. Session number 1 that covered school reopening. I just want to know how many new folks we have in the room so that we don't. Yeah, raise your hand if you did not come to session 1. Just a couple of people that are there. So this is folks that are back for some folks back for round 2. I think there's some value in going through one more time some information that we did in session number 1 so that those that are new here can take a look at what we have prepared here for this session. The whole goal that has been an MPEC goal, as well as for SAM and for MREA and for Montana School Board Association, is to be able to provide our collective membership with the resources necessary to be able to help them through what you've been experiencing here with the pandemic and everything from school closure to the reopening plans and all of the effort that's been put forth over the last 4 months and will continue all through this next school year. And so as part of the conference, you were on the virtual landing page. I'm sharing my screen. And so the landing page for the conference here, and you clicked on school reopening strategies, session number 2, and that's right where we're at right here. And so the resources that are already on the page, just some background on your presenters here. And then I'm pointing you to, after the session is over, this is where you would want to go to fill out an evaluation that then collects your OPI renewal units for your certificate and hours worth for attending this session. But most importantly, I wanted to point out to you the resources that are in this section. And so we've uploaded to this area the school reopening topic resources, of which Dennis is going to talk about a little bit. He's enhanced that, and I'll take the new version of what Dennis has put together and put it up on this session webpage so that you'll be able to see that. The MPEC Back to School Roadmap for Safely Reopening by looking at emergency school district policies. Lance is going to walk us through a bit of that document. Then we also have uploaded the governor's plan for safe and healthy reopening and the Reopening Montana Schools Guidance, which is a product of the Montana Safe Schools Advisory Committee. But OPI staffs that up, so sometimes you probably have seen that as characterized as the OPI school guidance. That's available to you on the site. Then I want to point out, I've uploaded, just most recently, I've added things today to this part. This is right off the SAM COVID-19 Information for Schools webpage, which those of you who are familiar is on the home page for SAM, and you click on COVID-19 and you can see that that web page contains lots of resources that hopefully have been culled to the point that it gets to the point and it's something that's valuable for you to take a look at as an administrator. What I've done is I've uploaded about the last week's worth of that information as a resource to aid us in the discussions that are here. You'll note that the Montana High School Association about an hour and a half ago released their return to fall activity requirement and guidelines and considerations. We haven't had a chance to review that at this point, but I'm just making you aware that that's available. The Administrators Institute is going on right now, and so that's just a way to get to the link of trying to get to this session. The guidance for the governor's coronavirus relief funds for schools, MPEC worked on this over the weekend to provide guidelines in the expenditure of dollars, and I want to spend some time going through that. And then there's additional information around the coronavirus funds, how you apply for them, what the deadlines are down here for taking a look at that. And I also want to point out that the model memorandum of agreement for human resources and collective bargaining during the pandemic is available here for your review. And then the last thing that I put up here is that we made a request of the governor for a limited waiver on the residency requirements for providing offsite instruction, which allows you to have non-resident students be able to deliver. That hasn't happened yet from the governor, but just wanted you to see that we're working on that part of it. So with that kind of preamble, access to the resources that are available to you, we're going to conduct this session by going first of all through a couple of the key elements that I just described to you. And then secondly, we're going to ask you that if you did not put your school reopening plan into the chat box in the last session, that you would go ahead and put any approved school reopening plans that you've developed, the link to that information with your school name by it, into the chat box so that we begin to collect those resources, and then we'll put that back up on the web page. And then we're going to close the session by having an open dialogue about strategies that you believe are key in your district that you would want to share with others, and also to do some question and answering from the panel of Lance, myself, and Dennis. So hopefully that'll be a great session. So with that, Dennis, I'm going to ask you to take a look at this document that you've been working on and explain that resource to our team.
Thanks, Kirk. As you can see across the top, that's the source of information that I've used. You've seen this before today. You'll notice that there's a new column on the far right. That's the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DEC. What I've done is I initially hoped to do a crosswalk of these documents where there was overlap, and didn't take very long to realize that there wasn't any overlap or very little overlap. And so what I did is I just selected topics from each of the documents, and then I've made a link. So the MPEC Emergency Policy Framework, you click on that, it takes you to the page of the PDF document where that's located. The first 4 columns are PDF documents. The fifth column, the CDC, is a web page, and there are fortunate enough that when they coded that page, they put anchor IDs for each of those, so it was easy to set a link that actually to that spot on the web page. This morning I added this Massachusetts DESE protocols, and on our web page, the actual document from that department is there. It's a 19-page document. It's fairly technical in comparison to what I've linked to here. What I've linked to here is an article that journalist Michelle Williams with Mass Live, she boiled things down to these questions with responses. And it's not so much about reopening as it is what in Massachusetts, what are they considering doing when a staff person or a student tests positive for COVID that attends a school. And these are responses to these questions and has their protocols in Massachusetts. And after having a discussion over the weekend with some acquaintances of mine that are in the medical field, one works in a hospital, the other works in a lab. Um, you know, even though you're working really hard, I know how hard it is and what a moving target it is for all of you. You're working on, so what's it going to look like when we open? The day after you open, um, I just wasn't really clear, and I wasn't sure if we had put together any information for you on what you would do if there was a positive test. And if we just take the state collectively, we know this is going to happen. There's no question. Where it's going to happen, level to which it's going to happen, it's anybody's guess. I actually think that it won't be real high, those levels, but it is going to happen. So what might be a possible response to that? And so I just put that up there for a resource for you. All of this is intended to try and help the work that you're doing locally be easier and to get the documents and get to the elements of the documents that you're looking to have questions about as quickly as possible. As Kirk noted, we have this up on our website. Probably in a couple of days after the conference, we'll have it up on theirs. And certainly, Lance, you know, if they want the code as well, it's pretty simple. If somebody wants to drop it, I can give it to you guys as well.
Thank you, Dennis, for the development of that resource. It's really good to kind of be able to pick and choose the kinds of things that are on there. And so I think it's a very valuable resource for our folks. Lance, I'm going to pull up the resource on our MPEC Back to School Roadmap and ask for you to speak to that, because I think that's a key document. So you're muted, Lance. Need to unmute.
There we go. Little Zoom etiquette, huh? Sorry about that. For those of you who were in the last session, and I think that's probably a large majority of you, I won't go back through here in any detail. Let me tell you that I do think that this represents the best work of all the partner groups in the Montana Public Education Center. It's very well annotated. Whether you have existing policy framework like MTSBA's or whether you use a different framework, the topical index in here will get you on the key issues that you want to address to both stabilize your funding and minimize, or at least contain to whatever degree you can, any liability associated with managing your way through COVID. So I kind of break this down to 4 steps that I think are important. Number 1 is to adopt the 1900 series itself, or at least most of the substantive issues addressed in it. Disinfection details that are in alignment with CDC guidance. Certainly the authorization of offsite learning, as I've said earlier, and needs board action, and the declarations and determinations of proficiency. Those are all intended to put in sort of fail-safes that will protect and preserve and stabilize your funding in the case of a hyper-regulatory auditor or staff member from OPI, or whether or not you're facing questions during the supplemental appropriation process. It's very important as well to extend the board's specific declaration of an emergency to cover this school year. It will ensure that that's actually the first fail-safe. If you don't have it and you miss some instruction and you haven't adopted anything else in here, you're going to get hit 2 times. It's like a penalty, double penalty for any hours of instruction that you miss. If you declare an emergency, then that penalty is brought down to a proportional reduction in funding. So again, the big picture, is to stabilize your funding, anticipate and provide you with defense against after the fact armchair quarterbacking about what you've done and that could otherwise have consequences for your funding, and also contain and mitigate your liability.
So I would point out also, Lance, that this table of topics makes this a hugely useful item. So depending upon what you're working with in your school district, whether it be reopening or you're trying to put policies in place, that if you're looking at different topical areas, that takes you to where you need to go within this framework. And the other value add that I do want to point out here is this cover page or cover pages that were established before each of the model policies was to describe an overview and whether it's required or not required type of policy. There's also a review of the types of procedures that you can do to get these policies and or administrative procedures in place without the standard number of readings in front of your board because they're emergency of nature. And then for me, as an administrator, the most important part that was prepared for these policies were the questions to consider on the use of the policy, how that can be used, and where it would help you. And so we've literally contemplated, MPEC has contemplated the impact of having this type of policy on school district operations and community engagement for the 1900 series. And when you get into the teaching and learning type policies that are there, there's literally 3 or 4 pages of questions that you should be asking yourself. And so this becomes in and of itself kind of a pretty good planning document. If you're able to answer all of the questions and all of those sections in the 1900 series, I think you pretty salty have things covered for your school district with how to proceed, not only with your reopening plan, but with the process and procedure that you need to use throughout this entire next school year. So I want to thank MPEC and MTSBA, for the work around putting this document together as an assistance to our schools. For my add to the resources that are available, I want to point out something that has just come available this morning, and that is MPEC over the weekend prepared guidance for the use of the coronavirus relief funds that were distributed or are being distributed by the governor. And so before I do that, I just want to show you the other resources so that you're aware of. Coronavirus relief funds amount to $75 million that are coming to our schools to be expended in your school by December 30th of 2020. And that in and of itself could be a significant challenge. And so it was decided by MPEC that if we could help you with some guidance on making the right kind of planning and then expending those funds, that would be a good assistance. And so I'll go over what that guidance is, but the context that I need to give to you here, first of all, is that 65 million and then 10 million for transportation is going to be distributed to public schools in Montana. That amounts to an A and B distribution of $418.50 per student. And that could be quite a sizable amount of money. So contained here for resource, all kind of in one place, is the district allocation by school, high school and elementary or K through 12 district, on what amount of money you can expect to be receiving once you complete the application. And so that's a resource that's available right here for your review. And then the actual application for the funds is a web page that's been built by the governor's office where you would click on that link and you can read what I've just basically described to you and what the timelines are that you can make application approved by March 27th or basically that you need to spend the funds by December 30th, which then in fact creates the challenge that I've described. This is the actual page that you go to make application. And so I suggest that, you know, you take a look at that, and you've also received emails from a variety of sources, I'm sure, that point out to that page. You would make applications submitted by July 31st, and the funding will be received by August 7th. Very quick turnaround. Applications submitted by August 14th will be funded by August 21st. Again, very short turnaround, and that August 14th is the deadline for making application for the funds. So there's two things that are at play here. This is a sizable amount of money. I characterize this as about a little bit more money than we've received during the 2019 session for inflationary increases for our schools. And so the characterization of that really, I think for the first time, and this is a hard take for educators, is that you potentially have enough resources to actually reopen your school in a manner that you can do so without scarcity. In other words, you can hire, you can buy the right kinds of things, you can put into place all of those elements that are listed as appropriate expenditures, and actually have enough resources to be able to do that. That's a foreign experience for educators. I realize that. And it also then becomes kind of a challenge that you have to be thinking through the fact of, so I have enough resources potentially to get the sorts of things that I need to have for reopening my school. How do I characterize and expend those dollars so that I'm not having to give those dollars back to the federal government, and or that I don't plan appropriately and end up having to cash reappropriate at the end of the school year because the funds that you utilized, you didn't transfer in the right way to make things balance for your district. And so that's getting me to this guidance. This was the forethought of MPEC then to provide something that's not overly complicated, but gives you a step-by-step, if you would consider those coronavirus funds that are coming to your school district in the 5-6 steps that we have outlined here. I think it gives you your best chance of being able to expend the funds appropriately to meet the needs of your school district and to be able to make your budgets work throughout the entire school year. So step one, you know, establish a coordinated process for tracking the revenues and the expenditures. Do that now. Put that in place. Analyze the document for expenditures, which that's the guidance document here. I could click on that, which I will. And I want to point out that bottom line, other expenses specifically documented and necessary related to COVID-19, that's within your perspective, your district's perspective. And so literally the kinds of things that you're working on, I'm suggesting that you don't need to get a bunch of permission here. Matter of fact, you know, I'll be bold enough to say that I would hesitate from asking advice from the regulators, either out of the governor's office or the Office of Public Instruction, on whether this or that is the right thing to do. I would merely follow the steps that we have prepared in this document, where you are taking the lead on here's how I'm expending the money, and I'm going to document what that is so that I can prove that this is what the expenditures were for. And then spending the funds is the most delicate of what that looks like. And there's a treatise on the different areas of where you can make the expenditure. But I want to answer one of the biggest questions that came out immediately is, you know, I need staffing. I need a different look at staffing, both from March 15th on to the opening of the school year. And if I hire staff, or if I change staffing, or I rehire those that had to be laid off as a result, and I need to expend the coronavirus funds and I want to use those funds by December 30th, how the heck can I make that work for the end of the year? And I'm just telling you that you already have flexibilities afforded in current law under the transfer of funds, that you can develop employment agreements that are available to you under the transfer information that's up here that would allow you to pay for that employee. I mean, you're going to use the coronavirus funds to pay for the first half of the year for that employee, and then make the appropriate transfers all the time being careful that you're not leaving yourself at risk for either sending the funds back to the feds from the coronavirus standpoint, or that you would be cash reappropriating because you didn't transfer appropriately from your general fund at the end of the school year. That's a function. You should be working with your clerk right from the very beginning on the use of these funds. And so that's my input on resources that are available to you from this point on, and that's all on the web page. All I'm doing is clicking on the links that are on the web page that are here. And so with that, any comments from Dennis or Lance on the resources that we've just outlined?
Kirk, I think it's very important, the point that you made about don't go asking a regulator if they'd like to regulate you. The answer will always be yes. And I just went through this last week. I'll give you an example of just sort of that mentality of this is the way we've always done it, that seems to control and dominate people whose careers were developed as regulators under the No Child Left Behind Act over the course of decades. And on Friday, I had a little back and forth because menial issue, but OPI was telling a district that they couldn't offer an individual transportation contract to a family to get actually to families in order to reduce bus ridership and physically distance and protect the health and safety of kids, because the OPI has a rule that says that you get the lesser of the mileage between the school and the home, or the home and the bus stop, which in this case was 20 feet away, but couldn't be used because the bus was full. And so, it took about 3 hours of my time to go in and bring it up the chain of command to the point where they acknowledge, yeah, our rule is in conflict with the statute. Sorry for defaulting to, this is always the way we've done it, and therefore it must be the way you have to do it tomorrow. I think Kirk is spot on about taking this guidance that's been crafted from the partners in the Montana Public Education Center and running with it. The governor's own directive here and guidance says that you get to call the shots. It's your discretion that matters. Document and show that you're spending the money to address the impacts of COVID, and you're fine.
Dennis, anything to add to the resources that have been presented?
No, not really. I think that both you and Lance have made good points. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, so I've just put into the chat box the request that you would, if you hadn't uploaded in the previous session, any school reopening plan that you've developed, if you would just put your school name and then a link into the chat for plans that have been approved. And I'll let you know that I believe by tomorrow afternoon, the Ed Advocates will be meeting, and there's already discussion about how do we collect what school reopening plans are so that they can be shared broadly, or that others would have access to see what other schools are doing, kind of the collective learning plan. And so I believe that likely is going to come out. I can tell you that Dennis and Lance and I at the Ed Advocates meeting will be working to develop a collection system that is the least invasive for you. And I'm kind of trying to demonstrate here by, it's as simple as if we created a Google Doc or a Google form and just put our request out to every district to go ahead and submit the link to their plan, and then we would be able to organize what that looks like by school district, and then make that available to everybody across the state who may want to have that resource. And that's the type of thing that we put up on the SAM website. And I know that MTSBA would put it up there, and MPEC would put it up there, and MREA would put that up on their website so that you have easy access to that. So for our purposes today, we would like you to upload that. A link is best. However, if you have a document and you want to upload the document, that certainly works too in the chat box. So if you would do that. couple of hands up. And so if you had a question from before, if you would just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask that question. So Marissa Stewart, is there a question? Yeah, I think maybe those are leftover hands from whether you were in the last session or not. So, okay. Can see that folks are uploading their plans. Thank you for doing that. Okay, at this point, what I would like to do is just open up for any questions that you might have of the three panelists here that have joined this session, and or to discuss a key strategy that you believe in your school reopening plan that you've addressed that would be valuable to share with others who are attending this session. So please unmute yourself and go for it.
This is Tanya Funk from Seiko School. Can you hear me?
We can, Tanya. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate all your work to keep us informed. This is a question for Lance. Lance, in regard to your 4 steps for schools to follow for the fall, if we have adopted the 1900 policy series, do we still need to do steps 2, 3, and 4, authorizing a resolution declaring the continuation? And this might be a repeated question. I wasn't in the first session, so I apologize if this is a repetition.
You need to unmute, Lance.
Yeah, you're good. If you've adopted the 1900 series, your board has authorized offsite instruction, and it's authorized declarations and determinations of proficiency. So those are your fail-safes that you want to have in place. I would make sure that your board's duration of its own declared emergency extends through June 30th, 2021 at a minimum, which will make sure that if everything else falls apart and you got to take your lumps for failing to meet aggregate hours and you don't have proficiency declarations, that you won't get double penalized. So that's really the batting cleanup. Make sure that the duration of the emergency is clearly specified to cover the current school fiscal year, and you should be fine.
Thank you, Lance.
Thank you.
Other questions or input on key strategies? It cannot be that this group of individuals doesn't want to share a key strategy or has a question about the things you've been working on.
Kirk, this is Lori. I'll break the ice. Surprise. Got a question from the union side of the model MOA that is causing us a little bit of concern. They're asking for a separate plan. What is it called? They're asking for a separate return to work plan. You know, we have our plan that we have already approved, have not done it a separate plan for staff because we're going to continue everything we do in that plan. We'll cover what happens with staff as well, and just want to make sure we're not getting ourselves legally obligated to develop another document outside of the MOA.
You know, Lance, do you want to address that? I'm not sure that you need to adopt that, other than, you know, your collective bargaining, and you need to meet with the folks, meet with your folks, and try to establish the best plan that you can.
Let me make sure. Okay, good. I'm unmuted. I would just say that again, you know, the Montana Supreme Court has been very unforgiving. I would call them pro-labor, anti-boss. The Montana Supreme Court given every chance for us to bring full meaning to the management rights clause, for example, in the Bonner case. The court said, nope, no, pretty much any change in working conditions whatsoever requires bargaining. That doesn't mean that you have to, it doesn't require that you concede, it doesn't require that you cave, but the entire purpose of the MOA was to give you a safe base of knowing that you have some parameters that have been negotiated at a state level as reasonably plausible for starting points in your negotiations. And so, you know, there are going to be circumstances where a union comes forward and requests more than what might be in the MOA. There may be circumstances where you're uncomfortable extending what's in the MOA. And either one of those circumstances is fine and is expected in terms of, you know, the bargaining process. We're hopeful that the MOA gives you enough beginning fodder, so to speak, to allow you to point to one another's state organizations and say, well, they thought this was reasonably okay. But I see troubling circumstances across the nation right now. As the closer you get to opening schools, and whether that's in California or New Mexico or Montana, you start to see sort of a visible, oh, I'm not sure I want to be there yet, from the staff. And so, you know, working out those issues and being able to effectively negotiate the changes in working conditions before you implement them is an important consideration. And there really isn't anything you can do to avoid the implication of a change in working conditions, because COVID itself changes the status quo, raises the stakes, introduces a new element of risk. So, you know, you're just going to have to kind of work your way through those issues. We can help at a leadership level to try to smooth those waters over when there's a union that is unnaturally asserting requests for concessions that are above and beyond what you see in the MOA, and we're glad to do that.
Other thoughts?
I will say I just double checked, and the word return to work plan does not, the saying or any derivation thereof does not appear in the MOA. So, you know, your return to work plan really is the MOA, along with any changes that you negotiate, because either you want less regulation than what's incorporated in there, or you see something in it that's problematic.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. Laurie again. The language says, once you have your MOA, what do I do next? Ask your district for their return to work plan, not the health and safety plan. So they're talking about a different document altogether. And, you know, we're not planning on continuing to produce multiple documents that tie us into things we can't possibly do. We have our overall plan, and then we intend to negotiate the MOA. I just wanted to make sure it would appear that the union is expecting each district to present a return to work plan, not the health and safety plan, before looking at the MOA. So just in case that's out there, that's what I've been asked for.
Yeah, I think that might be more a matter of confusion in the use of vernacular. And in fact, I wouldn't give them an opening to say, you want something else? I'd say, here it is, and I'd give them your reopening document.
Yeah, that's what we're planning. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tough topic. Thank you for the discussion. Other thoughts?
Alex Ader here. I have just a question I've been asking a lot locally, and I want to see what other people around the state are doing on this one. This is kind of a minute detail, but to me, it's functions our school in huge ways. What are people doing for subs? I'm concerned about staff having to quarantine for a couple weeks. You know, all the best practices talk about limiting visitors, those type of things. Subs have temporary employment, thus they don't end up in a spot where they necessarily kind of can be in that conversation where we're, you know, what are you doing in your off hours, stuff like that, to limit your things that we're going to talk about with our own staff locally, especially when they only have one day a week here and there. You know, they may work at a bar or a restaurant or the local drugstore, whatever that happens to be, for other employment. What are other schools doing around the state and planning for subs? We're talking a little bit here about maybe bringing on additional para or even additional certified teachers so we can handle all that stuff in-house. But I'm just wondering how other people are handling that potential. Thank you.
So you can either unmute and respond, or you could also put your response into the chat box so that we have a collected what you're doing. Also, there's a question from Linda Marsh there that we'll take that on, but we want to address this right now. Anybody have some thoughts for Alex about subs? Unmute yourself and
This is Martha Potter, and we've discussed that same thing, Alex, about trying to look at doing an ongoing sub or an ongoing para. The question that keeps popping into my mind, and I don't have an answer to it though, is that person now becomes one that if we did a full-time, we would still have to provide them their sick days, which we understand. But the other part of it is if they become sick, then I'm under the same problem I've had before. And so I don't have a solution to that. So all I know is we're going to do sub training this year of what we expect and what we can do along with our new teachers, just because we want to make sure that we cover the things that we do have. Besides, the other thing is I'm in a really small district and we just don't have substitutes. Sky, and it's been a real topic for us, and I don't have a solution, but man, I'm in the same boat as you. I'd love to hear what other people are thinking. We don't also have enough finances between the two to hire someone full, also provide the medical insurance and all of those issues. So I'm looking to other leaders for ideas.
I would just point out that you do have the resources based upon the coronavirus relief funds, that if that's a change, I would believe that, you know, that this is part of what the plan is and that you can utilize those funds and track them, that it was as a result of that to get substitutes in to help cover whatever your school reopening plan has in store. So it might be that resources aren't the critical factor. Human resources are, the ability to get subs and have them come in.
Well, my biggest problem is the amount of money that we have total all, plus also trying to buy the things that we need, because we don't have that large of an A and B, and that was our concern. So I agree with what we can do, but the other part of it is we actually are limited even trying to get maintenance people to clean. And so what we have done is I've worked with MREA and the MCP, I can't remember what it's called, but it's through the MREA. And anyway, I have worked with them, and we had a wonderful donor. Our coal mine, which most people know is going out, they came up, they donated half of what it would take to put a UVC light in every one of our classrooms at night, so our maintenance people can do the high touch points during the day and at night and empty the garbage, but then we disinfect with these UVC lights, and that literally took $26,000 of our funds, because I can't buy a person for what I could buy the lights for. So I'm kind of in a little bit of a dilemma there, and gratefully they matched us so that I can buy half of the lights on one side and half of the lights on the other. And yes, they have told me that was a little overkill when I talked to the company, but I said, we have no one to move them every single night. So they have to be stored in the classroom, programmed to go on at a certain time. And of course they have automatic shutoffs so that there's no damage. So that's the only thing I can say that I've really committed to. And also for our bathrooms, we're doing the same thing. We're in the process right now of ordering misters that we do all the high touch areas. And at night they walk in and they mist it one more time before anybody comes. And because we only have 2 maintenance people, and it has taken us a year to fill those positions, and then one just quit, and we finally found someone that said she would do it. And so we're in the process of hiring. So I'm looking at how to best use the funds for as long as we can with both the ESSER money, and also I pretty much probably have that our gracious $46,000 spent just between getting equipment and I have enough supplies on hand. We haven't required masks, but should we be required governmentally, I have to have them on hand. And so all of those things that have been budgeted for, but I just am in a quandary, and I'll be honest, I'm putting quite a bit of money into the salaries. And the reason I am is because should we be able to have our sports through MHSA, and we do not have any gate, we will not have a way to get gate money to pay those referees. And that is just as equally important for a child to have the extracurricular as it is the other. So a lot of that I'm doing for salaries in that realm. And also if I have teachers that have extended their 12 days, we budget for that. But after that, I don't have extra funding laying around. So I've put salaries and funds that way as well.
Kirk, can I offer a couple of suggestions, or at least just ideas that folks should watch out for? First of all, with regard to staffing, I would really make sure, particularly if you don't want to find yourself in a circumstance where you suddenly become burdened with the obligation to track vacation and sick leave and such. In the case of your classified staff, use the designation of short-term worker in the law. That's in Title II, Chapter 18. It's 2-18-101. And a short-term worker is somebody that you can hire without using a competitive selection process for any hourly wage you determine appropriate. They can't work more than 90 days. They're not eligible for permanent status, and they don't get leave and holiday benefits. That's one potential little place there if you're looking to fill in gaps on a part-time basis. The other thing is that with regard to any of these folks that you're hiring for the first time, the Americans with Disabilities Act allows you to have a pre-employment medical examination. It's something you can't do with regard to your ongoing staff, but a pre-employment medical examination may be in order, including a negative COVID test, for example, as part of ensuring that you are able to hire them. The other thing that comes into play, and I don't know how to answer it for you, but I want you to be aware, is that the Montana Supreme Court has previously held that a public employee has a constitutional right, not unlimited, but a constitutional right to moonlight. And in that particular instance, the Department of Revenue had an assessor who was doing fee-based real estate appraisals on his own time, and the agency tried to stop him. And the court said, you can't do that. I'm laying that out there for you because if you've got short-term workers, part-time staff, beginning new staff who are also working down at the drugstore, and you want to say, we're not going to hire anybody who's working in retail because there's an increased risk of exposure before they come here, that you may have to confront that particular issue, just to be aware of it. But if it were me, I would make very clear to document based on CDC guidance and other resources out there that show that if you want to only hire people that are not otherwise exposed on a regular basis to COVID, you may want to clearly document what those places would be in your guidance. The other thing is, remember that you have extensive authority and flexibility with regard to your safety funds. Safety covers COVID in a nutshell. Don't worry about it not covering it. It's for student and school safety and security. And anything what that means is that if you have any money laying any place in any fund, budgeted or non-budgeted, you can move it over to the building reserve fund and use it to cover the cost of addressing COVID to the extent that the stimulus funds are inadequate. It also means that you can jump to the front of the line and spend money you've already collected for your major maintenance on school safety issues. And as a result of legislation last time around, if any of you are thinking about any HVAC improvements, for example, you can go get a intercap loan from the Board of Investments and use your major maintenance funds to cover that as well. So there's a few other little tools in the chest out there that you may want to look at. But filling in those gaps and not finding yourself having to plug in, one FTE or nothing, there's some issues in between there, and both in terms of the prorated expense that was already discussed here, and also the short-term worker status and other flexible ways of getting part-time services.
Lance, a quick follow-up. This is Laurie again. Two things. One, so if we had somebody who's already on our substitute list, we could instead use them as a part-time worker as long as we don't go for more than 90 consecutive days and we don't have to provide employee protections.
Different issue for your subs. Your subs for teaching staff.
No, not to teach, just to let them, they used to be a sub, but I want them to be a part-time worker to help us just survive.
And not in an instructional capacity, a substitute for a classified staff member.
Correct. Well, what if you had them in the building and they were going to work for less than 90 days, 89 days, just to help you open and survive, run lunches to parents, answer phone calls, back up people who need it. You had a teacher call in at the last minute, so they're on the sub list. Can they sub for one day and then go back into part-time worker, or they cannot sub for a teacher at all during that 90 days?
It's two different issues there. There's a firewall between classified staff and certified staff or licensed staff and substitutes for those positions. The short-term worker reference that I'm giving you is in Title II, and those are only for your non-instructional staff. So if you had a substitute bus driver, for example, or a substitute food service worker, you could use the short-term worker and have more of a stable platform there, and up to 90 days in a continuous 12-month period, and you can discharge them without cause at any time. It's just, and you have the clear authority here by virtue of the use of short-term worker as that job title in not granting them leave and holiday benefits under state law.
So if they are in that position, I've just got a person who's going to be in that position and I have an emergency one day and I need them to substitute for a certified teacher. Can they substitute for a certified teacher during that 90 days? Not ongoing, not every day, not the same teacher, an emergency fill-in for a day.
They could, but you won't be able to gain the benefit of calling them a short-term worker in that capacity.
Just for that one day though?
Correct.
So for that one day, they would be a substitute for a certified teacher, not going over 30 days. So not requiring bargaining, not requiring a contract. And the other days they would be a short-term worker.
Yes.
Okay. And on a big jump, knowing this is probably unlikely, you were talking about being able to move funds, anything for safety. Can we move coronavirus relief funds into anything in that count?
I wouldn't recommend a transfer of those funds. I'd keep them in the miscellaneous programs fund, tie them tightly to your unique project code, and report them under for revenue 7,700 and expense 770.
Thank you.
Kirk, this is Rick. Can you hear me all right?
You bet. Go, Rick.
So a little change of topic or change of subject, and I realize that no, you haven't had an opportunity to look at the MHSA's guidelines for fall sports yet, but just some considerations that I've had. And, unfortunately, but realistically, when I'm on aisle 5 of Safeway, there's more conversations about fall sports than there is about academic achievement, and that's a reality. So, when I'm looking at their guidelines that came out this morning, there's nothing really regarding transportation for that. And, when you look at the reality of transporting a football team or a volleyball team somewhere, and you look at the busing guidelines for that, I mean, we're going to have to take multiple buses to events. That's one issue, but it's also, and I think this kind of plays the point we talked about earlier, and that's liability protection for schools. in terms of exposure, either away or at home for that. So exposure of our students going to another location and exposure of others coming into our location in terms of our liability protection there. And my third point, and I'm addressing it to all three of you, my third point is in terms of enforcement on the masking regulations, because there'll be more than 50 people in a gymnasium or on at a football stadium. And, you know, where are we in terms of being able to, the enforcement aspect of wearing masks of 50 or more in a gathering? And I'll just leave it there.
Kirk, do you mind if I take a shot at a couple of things just from a cursory review?
Yes, I just want to point out that there are several things that are in the chat box as well. We'll try to answer. You know, we're going to run out of session time here. We'll try to answer those and leave them in the record, and then that stuff will be uploaded to this session webpage so that you have complete information. So go ahead, Lance.
Well, first of all, I just noticed that that MHSA had a provision in their guidance that said that you could print at your own risk statements on every ticket sold for the contest. You could, but it might cost you more ink than you gain in benefit. You can't waive yourself from liability. The Montana Supreme Court has said that pre-tort liability releases are void as against public policy, and they could actually give you more trouble than you might hope that you would gain by somebody being buffaloed into thinking they were valid. If you try to overextend what you're trying to release yourself from in liability, you could even end up with punitive damages, for example. But the courts have ruled that pre-tort releases of liability are unlawful as against public policy. There is a model form. It's a nuance here. It's legalese, and I'm an attorney, so I get to do that, I guess. But there is a model form in the 1900 series that allows you to demonstrate that the parties participating were aware of the damages, and that can provide you some measure of liability. But absent that, and absent, you know, the old adage, you know, prove it, that we hear from some folks out there. Again, someone will say, I'd be glad to try to do that. And if I win for this person, then I get 33% of their award before trial, 50% after, and 66% if it goes to appeal. And that's the way these guys make a living. They eat what they can kill. And so you got to know that school districts are deep pockets with a statute that says you can have 750 grand per person liability and 1.5 million for every occurrence. And they know that you're statutorily obligated to maintain insurance and that you have a judgment levy backing that up. You're a deep pocket. And there are likely going to be some attempts to create liability for school districts. We're working with legislators, letting them know that we believe it's extremely important, not just for private business, but for schools and other public entities, to have the legislature step in, or the governor through his executive power, and relieve you of liability for COVID-related illnesses. We'll see where that goes. So, you know, the other thing is that mask directive, just tell you very candidly, I was sitting there busily writing guidance of telling school districts in a message that was going to be hitting the post button that said, you're covered by the mask directive right now. And that's what the four corners of the governor's directive says. It says it applies to government offices, and that includes the definition of political subdivisions. There's an AG's opinion, several court cases, and at least 3 statutes that say that schools are political subdivisions. And then, applicable to what you just said, Rick, it also applies to both public and private entities who who have the public space, either by right of invitation or right of participation, are subject to a mask directive. And but for the governor's verbal statement, which, by the way, has absolutely no legal consequence whatsoever, doesn't bind a third party who gets infected because you thought that the governor said you didn't have to have a mask directive, and so you opened up the gym and somebody got infected. The governor's verbal statement that his directive doesn't apply will not protect you when the infected individual who arrives at your doorstep ends up either infecting someone else or becoming infected and suing you. So I think it's only a matter of time until the governor extends that directive more formally and clears the confusion around his verbal disclaimer. So that's another thing just to be ready for, that if you're moving about and thinking, well, masks are voluntary, I wouldn't count on it before you open up.
So I would just add also, Rick, that at the federal level, CARES Act number 5, Mitch McConnell has language in that addresses legal liability for schools and school districts. Whether that bill ends up passing, that's a federal issue as well, and that might, quite frankly, be the best. The best advice to follow is all the way from the federal level, if in fact that language gets through. So I wouldn't hold my breath, but that's another area that we're watching. So you guys, great conversation. You can feel the depth of the topics that you're working on. I hope this was valuable, just to be able to get those questions out there. Some response in the chat box. We're out of time for this session, and so I want to bring you back to the session web page, which is there, and point out to you, I'm sharing on my screen right now. Tell us what you thought about the session. When you complete that evaluation, that's what generates your renewal unit credit for attending this session. And then I'll also ask you to navigate back to the conference landing page after we close up here. And take that 15-minute break, go and visit the virtual exhibit hall, talk to our business partners. And at noon, I want to invite you specifically to the How I'm Teaching Remotely, a master teacher of blended learning, Paul Anderson, finalist for National Teacher of the Year in 2011 and a Montana Teacher of the Year. Has some really good thoughts and strategies that I hope that you'll participate in that last session of the day. And so I need to sign off. Thank you for attending session number 2 on school reopening strategies. Thanks for your work out there.